A very good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming in. What a brilliant panel we have. Luminaries in their own sense, and we have very, graceful personalities in front of us. For me, it's a dream come true to have this panel. And what a topic about diversity. And we have a diverse panel. We have a prominent historian. We have a human rights activist and a very strong and bold writer. So we'll start without wasting any time. Madam, we have been hearing this phrase, the idea of India. For a lot of us, even, when we were teens, or it was the way we never had to tell this phrase very prominently. But now everybody is talking about the idea of India. My question is there an idea of India, first of all? If there is an idea of India, since when was this idea of India there? And what is it actually? That's I think we have to be clear about this. So I would like Mridula ji to start with this.
Thank you, Senthil. I speak as a historian, so I will take you back, certainly to the formative years of the freedom struggle, but even a little bit beyond that, because I think the idea of India, firstly, let me just say that the term idea of India was coined by Rabindranath Tagore. Because I'm clarifying this because later it has been attributed to some scholars and all that, but that's not correct. So it's Rabindranath Tagore's phrase, which he popularized. And what it means is a certain conception of India, which includes the past, the present, and the future. So the idea emerges out of our history. It's also embodied then in a vision for the future, which is articulated by our struggle for freedom as it evolved. So I would say that there are three crucial components of this idea of India. The first one is the idea of civil liberties and democracy, in which is embedded also the idea of secularism. Because you cannot have democracy in a multilingual, multi-religious country unless you also talk of protecting the interests of minorities, unless you talk of secularism, unless you talk about protecting the interests of different linguistic groups. So diversity, which is an essence of our culture, our history, gets embodied in this basic idea. Civil liberties and democracy are therefore meant to protect that whole structure. So in a sense, it's a complex of these ideas that gets expressed in the notion of democracy and civil liberties. We get these ideas emerging very early on in our freedom struggle from the late 19th century itself. It is quite amazing that the earliest of our freedom fighters, of the generation of Dadabhai Naoroji, Gokhale, etc., who were very familiar with what was going on in Europe, in Britain. As you know, Dadabhai Naoroji himself was a member of parliament. Gokhale was fully versed with what is going on in Britain. He was a liberal. They called him a liberal, but if he was in British politics, he would be much to the left of what the liberals were at that time. That from a very early time, the idea of democracy got articulated as adult franchise also. In fact, Lokmanya Tilak floated a bill, not in the assembly, but in the public, called the Constitution of India Bill in 1895. And it had the idea of adult franchise in it, when nobody had adult franchise yet in Europe. Women got the franchise after the First World War in England. Women in Switzerland in certain cantons didn't get it till the 1970s. It's a process. Even the working class got rights in Britain very gradually, voting rights over the 19th century. Even till the late 19th century, not everybody had got rights. So our freedom struggle had a very radical conception of democracy, which included adult franchise rights for both men and women from a very early age on. At least the ideas were there. Secondly, civil liberties is again something that was very important. And there was a good historical reason for it. All our freedom fighters, most of them brought out their own newspapers. They were middle class people who put their own money into starting newspapers. They were not owned by big magnates. And that's one reason that they were free. They fought for the freedom of the press, because under the British we did not have freedom of the press. As early as 1870, the British got so scared of radical ideas in the Indian language press, what they called vernacular, that they brought an act into being called the Vernacular Press Act. They didn't attack the English press, they attacked what they call the vernacular press. Because the vernacular press is already talking about nationalism by the 1860s and 70s. So they all had to fight for the freedom of the press. So through their own practice itself, they got committed to these ideas. You see, ideas become reality when they become part of your life. You know, you fought for them, you see their importance. Tilak went to jail. Surendranath Banerjee was the first person to go to jail. He was charged under violating the Freedom of Press Act, because he gave some speech and this and that and the other. And Tilak, of course, had a long jail term, his first one, because again, he was prosecuted under the Vernacular Press Act for what he wrote. And second time also when he went, the British were very fond of catching people under, even Gandhi, though obviously that was not the only reason that they sent him to jail in 1922 at the, after the non-cooperation movement had just been called off, but he was actually charged under the Press Act for what he had brought out in Young India. So freedom of press, freedom of expression, and then this, came later with the fundamental rights to freedom of forming a union and other things. But this basic idea was a very important component of the idea of India. That the future India that we see, that the freedom for which we are fighting is not going to end up in one democracy. So no, the notion of Prajatantra or Loktantra, Kisan Mazdoor Ka Raj, as we went along in the 20s and 30s. We were not going to go back to a feudal system. We are not going to go back to a monarchy. We are not going to establish an authoritarian system, a fascist system. No. We are working for a democratic system. So that was very, very important. And with full civil liberties. All our founding fathers, as well as later on, were fully committed to civil liberties. Gandhiji himself was a radical supporter of civil liberties. He said civil liberties is something that can never be diluted. And the simile which he gave was that it is the water of life. Without it, there is no life. And water, he said, can never be diluted. You can dilute milk, you can dilute alcohol, you can dilute other things, but you can't dilute water, So this was the kind of metaphor which he gave. The other two critical components was, one, the notion of working for a pro-poor system. The idea of socialism was very powerful in the freedom struggle from the 30s onwards, but it was not a hegemonic idea. In the sense, not everybody accepted socialism. But everybody accepted that it must be a system with equity, tilted heavily in favor of the poor. That's why we use the term pro-poor. From the time of Dadabhai Naoroji, who brought out poverty and un-British rule in India, the focus on poverty eradication and the poverty of the peasant was at the heart of the freedom struggle. And as I said, as we go later on, when Gandhiji, of course, brought the whole focus on the poor, and the underdog, as a crucial part. Even his concepts of the Ridra Narayan, because he used terminology which made sense to the ordinary people, that God resides in the poor. So the sense that the poor have as much dignity as anybody else. That notion was also a very important component. And the third component was that of sovereignty. given that it was a fight against a colonial regime, so the anti-colonial content, India must be free, it must be sovereign, it must be able to speak in its own voice. It must not become a camp follower of anybody. Therefore, we ended up with non-aligned movement. All that comes out of that idea. We are not fighting for freedom so that tomorrow we become a junior member of some bloc, or we sacrifice our independence to anybody else. So in a very brief way, these were critical ideas, and the idea of very much of diversity, I just want to emphasize a little bit there. The conception of Indian nationalism, which the freedom struggle evolved, was very different from the European conception of nationalism, which was based on, certainly on one language, and even combined with that, often on one religion, like France, for example, was visualized as a one language, one religion country. To be French meant to be Catholic and to speak the French language. So as the French nation evolves, it suppresses other languages. There were many languages in France which got suppressed in that process. Similarly, other religions were discriminated against, as we know. In Britain, the English language along with Protestantism. In Germany, German plus Protestant. So somewhere religion and language combinations emerge in different parts of Europe. But our freedom struggle was remarkably free of that. They visualized a completely different kind of nationalism, which was based on a multilingual conception, because there could not be an Indian nationalism which was single language. If you wanted to unite all the peoples of India, it was very clear that they all had highly developed cultures and languages. So you had to guarantee protection to their cultures and their languages in order for them to join into a nation. So the nation is therefore conceived of as a multilingual. Similarly, we had so many religions. If you want to unite all the people, you have to have a conception of nationalism which is secular, multi-religious. So the very nature of the country gave rise to an Indian nationalism, which was the word they used was also composite nationalism, which had different components. And that could then be extended to tribal peoples. Their cultures have to be protected. You know, the different kinds of groups. Even Aurobindo, who is much appropriated these days by our, hegemonic powers today, was so clear that Indian nationalism meant accepting the diversity of India. And he said, different components of this nation will join the nation. He said, join the nation at their own pace. And he talks about, the word he uses, aboriginal tribes. But he even mentions tribes and castes and regions. They have their own pace of historical evolution, and the nation must accommodate that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mridula ji. It's like a very, the components of diversity or the idea of India, which Mridula ji has said. I want to ask Shabnam ji. Shabnam ji has worked extensively in the field of human rights. You have worked in Gujarat. When you go to places like Gujarat and do the kind of work that you do you see this idea of India has percolated into people of India? Is it something which they really think is precious for them as Indians? Do they identify with this idea of India?
See, let me first begin with a little bit about the idea of India. As I see, the components for the idea of India existed in our country for centuries. We have more than 6,400 communities. We speak in 700 languages. We have 8 major religions in this country. And they have interacted with each other for centuries. Not only interacted, but lived together in harmony, gained from each other, and in the process evolved. whether it is the religions or it is culture, any part of culture, whether it's music, dance, languages, our philosophies, different philosophies that have existed in this country. And it is, I see the formulation and the evolution of the idea of India as diverse ways of dissent against the British colonialism. It is the coming together of various kinds of streams of people who come together in their own ways, fighting the British imperialism, and in that process, having all the differences possible. There is difference between what Gandhi is thinking and that what Ambedkar is thinking. There is difference of opinion between the extreme revolutionaries and the centrist forces. There is difference of opinion between various philosophies, between writers, poets, intellectuals, but people from all kinds of backgrounds are joining the struggle to defeat British imperialism. There are some people who are fighting the old Rajas and chieftains. They are fighting one kind of battle. And also, you see, one is that because of this diversity, whatever thinking is coming, whatever ideas are coming and formulating this idea of India, they by definition become diverse. They have to be diverse. They have to be plural. Because it is not one kind, as Mridula said, it's not one language. There are 700 languages. There are tribals, there are Dalits, there are, all kinds of farmers, women joining the movement, there are intellectuals, artists. So all these ideas are joining together. And they are joining together to resist. So these are various ways of resistance. Women are resisting in one way. The chieftains are resisting in another way. And also, I think what is very important, that till the resistance is in the physical form, whether it is Bhagat Singh or other earlier whom they were called terrorists, they are trying to counter the British at the level of physical force. And they are being defeated because British army is technologically, in numbers, is much bigger. It is when the idea of India becomes bigger than the British ideas of how to oppress people. It is when the idea of India has all different streams coming together. And especially after Gandhi re-enters India, returns to India. The idea of non-violence. When we start fighting the British at the level of ideas, when it becomes the battle of the minds and the hearts, then we win that battle. Before that, we are not winning that battle. We are fighting. Farmers are fighting. They are being oppressed. There are tribal leaders who are fighting. They are being killed across India, across various parts of India, which is actually not even one country at that time, it is a nation in the making. It is not even, we can't say that Indian nation was there. So once we graduate to this new level, then the actual idea of India with all its diversity and plurality emerges, and it is able to defeat the British over, it's a long period of history that happens. And one more thing which I want to say before I come to your question, that I feel that if we have to safeguard this idea of India, then the dissent in today's time has to be as diverse as it was when we were fighting the British. It is only the diversity and the plurality of the dissent on the ground level that can defeat these forces of fascism, of hatred, of bigotry. And then we come to Gujarat, which is actually the laboratory which attacked the very idea of India, which attacked pluralism, which attacked diversity, which brainwashed people over decades. It is not 1 or 2 or 3 days. When 2002 happens, now it is BBC film, a lot of people have seen. But what probably the film doesn't talk about, that the major attack, apart from the businesses and human beings was on the diversity of the culture. There were over 300 dargahs which were demolished in Gujarat in the first 10 days of 2002 carnage. Because Sufi dargahs are places where people from all communities meet each other. So Gujarat has ensured that people don't see each other, that a Hindu does not see a face of a Muslim, and a Muslim doesn't know what a Hindu is and how diverse the Hindu culture is, or how diverse Islam is. So when you ask me that whether in Gujarat people love or engage with the idea of India, yes, there are a lot of people who do, but there is a large section which does not, which is spending all its energies in killing the idea of India. And a big challenge, whether it is Gujarat or Karnataka, it is whether we are able to get people from various backgrounds to nurture, to safeguard the idea of India from their own perspectives. Artists, intellectuals, farmers, women, youth, students. It has to be every section of the society getting up and safeguarding the idea of India. Otherwise, I think we have lost, I mean, we are living in a semi-fascist state already. And it's just a question of few more years if people do not wake up, whether in Gujarat or in other parts.
So you don't need not have a physical oppressor. When an idea is oppressed and we don't do much about it, then I think there's a lot of damage to the entire society as such. So Saba is, as you know, as I just read up, for your first book, you travel the entire country, you know, the length and breadth of it to write the book. You have seen people, you have seen ages, you have seen time, you have been consistently writing about it. Do you see that there is a change, or, you know, the way India has evolved in the last 50 years, especially in the last 10 years? You know, a lot of us might, you know, the millennials especially, they have seen a different India. Do you think they are really seeing a different India, or was this always the case?
No, I think there's no doubt we are seeing a different India. You mentioned a work of mine, my voice is echoing back to me, which I traveled after the demolition of the Babri Mosque all over India. And that would eventually be a series of columns in the Indian Express. And it came out in a book. I'm very happy to say that last year that book was translated into Marathi and it won the Sahitya Academy Award. My translator was stunned. Then he looked up and he said, oh, they didn't change the Marathi jury as yet. So, fine, you know, because every language has. So, it's just now that book, it's called In Good Faith. I wish someday there'll be a Kannada, it was just now, the Marathi translation. So what did I do? I just literally went on the road and I wanted to find out for myself, is this idea of synthesis, composite culture, pluralism, is it real or is it a myth that my father has been talking to me about my entire life? Is it for real? And I was not interested in high culture because I had been exposed to it, high Urdu poetry, beautiful architecture, beautiful synthesis. I was interested in popular cultures. So for 2 years I traveled, and there was somebody called Professor Rashiduddin Khan. He was a political scientist, very small fund. I left my job. I was a young trainee. I left my job in India Today. And he is the father of the filmmaker Kabir Khan. Just so to put things correctly, he was a political scientist from JNU, that terrible, evil organization called JNU, from where my fellow panelist comes. Huh? He supported that effort, and I was in my 20s, and Indian Express gave me a space to write. So people were worried about what was happening, so I went. I found fascinating things. I found Sufi shrines which Muslims had abandoned, because there was a version of Islam which said that this is not the correct form, which Hindus were looking after. There was some which became so lucrative that both wanted a piece of it. Because religion is also finances, people go, you get money from the shrines. I found communities which said they are both Hindu and Muslim. I found this in Bengal. Today, can you imagine artists who have a Muslim name but they have a Hindu working name? They are called the Patachitra painters. Small communities. Of course, everybody, I mean, I know now there's a Muslim goddess in Bengal, a Muslim goddess. Islam does not permit idol worship, but there are idols made of a Devi called Bon Bibi. You have musical traditions, the Manganyar singers, the Langa singers of Rajasthan, which have been popularized in Hindi cinema. In your state, you have so many beautiful, even the religion of Basava actually is part of the Bhakti Sufi movement, which has determined the course of history of Karnataka. You have all that. You had all that, but things are changing. Because since I did that work, I have kept an eye out on things. So things are changing, yet everything is not over at the same time at the popular level. What is happening is, I think in many shrines, I think Hindu attendance is coming down, yet you have the Sai Baba phenomena, where the Sai Baba, who was a Muslim godman, he is one of the biggest, he's like a godhead in the modern Hindu pantheon. There has been study of modern religious icons, Santoshi Ma, very popular because of a film. Sai Baba's tradition also gets supported through cinema and culture and all that, but his origins are Muslim. However, in your state, I have also been to the Datta Pitha shrine in Chikmagalur. There, one version is that this is the individual who gets coffee into India, who brings the coffee beans into India. But today there is a conflict there. They say that it is a Hindu god and and there is now a court order. So what I'm saying is, the things that I looked at, it enriched my life experience because I traveled for 2 years non-stop across India. I went mostly by train, buses. I went to the strangest parts. I lived in the Sundarbans. I did all that. It made my life very rich, but these traditions, they both live and they die. It's a very sort of one of those enigmatic things to say. We can never say whether when it's over or whether it's dying, but some ways of lives and thinking get abandoned. And that enthusiasm for telling a narrative does not stay. For instance, as I talk to you right now, there is the big news in India, in the English media or the Hindi media, even in Delhi, from where I come. Unfortunately, I live there. I love my city, but I don't like the politics there sometimes. So the big news is a BBC documentary being banned, but simultaneously, when I check my social media, Pathan is setting new records in the box office. So what do we conclude from all of this? The BBC documentary, which I've seen part 1 and part 2, documents the problem of the current rulers of India with the Muslim community. Basically, it's that. Even part 2 is about, more of you may have seen part 1. Part 2 is about Kashmir, CA, protests, Assam, all of that. So it's basically that, but yet at the same time, you have this film, this icon, whose son was sent to jail on a very spurious charge. Make no mistake, there is an attempt to harass anyone with a Muslim name. It could be a journalist, it could be it's an added thing. You could be an opposing, me and Mridula could both be journalists who are opposing the same thing. But in this case, I will get a police complaint just for being my name. It is that situation, but I don't feel victimized because I know there are real victims out there. And my job as a journalist is to tell other people's stories. I've always seen it like that. So that's a very difficult question to answer, but India is very different. I think what I find, I wouldn't say this here because many of you who are still sitting in this audience believe in a secular, progressive, plural India. One of the things that I see different between North India and here is, even though there has been a very big political success of Hindutva in North India, Because educational figures in institutions, you don't have that high rates of technical education there. So the success of Hindutva by a political analyst like me can be measured through caste, community, regions, all of that, how they've done it. There is an untapped thing here, which I'm not sure whether there is enough work done among the youth, because there is a very large youth which is coming through the technical education route here. Whereas I can assure you that the ABVP and the RSS are doing the work there. Yeah. This is my little observation as a journalist. It is not so, because I'm a visiting professor in a university there also. It is not, the students' body is not entirely communalized. You will even have, yes, there is a larger presence of BJP people's children around, but that doesn't mean that they're all fully communalized either. They're just not political. They're into the new age. But what I'm seeing is both you are better off apparently than the North, but there are greater signs of danger also here that I see. Because if you are not able to reclaim the minds which are coming, this huge pool where you are ahead of North India, which is coming out in a certain way of thinking, if in this area you're not able to understand, we cannot measure, as a journalist I cannot measure the demographics. That is why anecdotal evidence has a lot of power also. It's impossible. So I have given a jumbled up answer because I don't think to anything we have absolute answers in this country. So that's what I would say.
I agree.
But
I completely agree. And yeah.
There was a suggestion that you might translate a bit the people who obviously don't know English. So
Yeah.
you can summarize just to give them the drift of what's
Yeah.
going on.
ಓಕೆ ಸೊ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸಂಕ್ಷಿಪ್ತವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಸಭಾಗೆ ನಾನು ಏನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಈಗ ಅವರು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಬುಕ್ ಬರೆಯುವಾಗ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶ ಉದ್ದ ಅವರು ಟ್ರಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ 2 ವರ್ಷ. ಸೊ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಏನಿತ್ತು, ಆ ಟೈಮಿಗೆ ಆ ಬುಕ್ ಬರೆಯುವಾಗ ತಾವು ಏನು ಒಂದು ಭಾರತವನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದಿರಿ, ಆ ಭಾರತ ಈಗ ಇನ್ನೂ ಇದೆಯಾ, ಅದೇ ಭಾರತ ನಮಗೆ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಿಲೇನಿಯಲ್ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ ಭಾಳ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ, ಅವರು ನೋಡುವ ಭಾರತ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿರುವ ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ನಾವು ಹಾಗೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ನೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಏನು ಒಂದು ಭಾರತವನ್ನು ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ, ಇದು ಭಾಳ ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಹಿಂದೆ ಬಂದಿರುವ ಭಾರತ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದರ ಒಂದು ಎಂಟೈರ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದು ಮುಂದೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಹೌದು, ಈ ಕಾಲಘಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂ. ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು, ಒಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ದಾಳಿ ಇದೆ. ಆದರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಎದುರಿಸುವ ಒಂದು ಮಾತುಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ ಹತ್ರ. ನಾರ್ತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಮತ್ತು ಸೌತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ ಇದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಷನಿಂದ ತುಂಬ ಮಂದಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರುವ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾರ್ತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಅಷ್ಟು ಏನು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ಇನ್ನೂ ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಹೇಗೆ ಎದುರಿಸ್ತೀವಿ ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ ಡಿಪೆಂಡ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಉತ್ತರ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾ Mridulaji, because the way we read about India and we understand the history of India, even today, we see every village, every panchayat, every town, it's very unique. It's diverse, it's unique. As a historian, can you enlighten us on some movements? I know that you have extensively studied the peasant movements, where people of different cultures who have come together and stood together with each other, because we are seeing a revival of those movements when we fight this system. Was it historically also the same, where people coming together irrespective of their differences and organizing various peasant movements against the British or even before that? Can you give us some examples of some movements that we can learn from?
Yes, certainly. I think that's a very good question. I think if we go back, 100 years or a little, roughly around that time. I mean, you specifically asked about peasant, especially because, peasants are located very much in their local environment. So Peasants are therefore always difficult to consolidate and organize into a movement, because unlike workers who are physically concentrated, let's say in factories, and also their lifestyle tends to get homogenized, their problems tend to be similar. So there's a greater ease of organization. Peasants typically have multi-location context. And also, as you said, there is so much diversity even at the local level. As you find, even if you walk 30 kilometers, you will find some change in dialect, some change in dress, some change in food, little bits here and there. So that diversity is there. And also our people, and peasants particularly, are very attached to their local culture. So the village identity is a very strong identity. But that also becomes an advantage. Because I found, for example, I did detailed research on Punjab in the from about, let's say, early 20th century till 47. And what I found was that the village identity became very useful, because if there was significant number of people in the village who were, became conscious, or there was a local leader, then it became very easy for them to organize the whole village. And once villages got mobilized, it was not easy to shake them, because then they also thought of themselves as a unit. And in fact, the term they would use is that like a fort. You can't shake us, you can't penetrate to each village. So if an outsider tried to come and mess around over there, even I'll give you examples. When partition occurred, and there was in Punjab, the area which I studied got divided. And movement of people from one side to another, massacres are happening. Those areas where secular traditions were very powerful, where left was very powerful, where the peasant leaders, they mobilized the villages to protect the people of the other community, then the whole village would function as a fort. And they would say, if marauders came from somewhere else, they would say, you can't enter our village. Here we are protecting the Muslims. Nobody's going to come and touch us. So it's very interesting what you're saying. Beyond that, it was also very interesting, and this is something we learned from caste identity was also a very important identity around which wider mobilization took place. Because caste is then pan-village at least. It is local, but it is beyond the village. So in most parts of India, castes are also organized into larger groups. And in the freedom struggle, they used it for a positive purpose. You can also use it for a negative purpose. But it got used for a positive mobilization. And of course, it got transcended because they did not continue to see themselves only as members of a caste, but they saw themselves also as members of a nation. So it was a process. So the way in which the leaders of that time, the cadre of that time mobilized, was to not fight against local identities, not deny local identities, mobilize them for a positive cause, and in the process also get people to transcend those and begin to see themselves as part of a nation. So I'll give you an example. When the Bardoli movement took place, and it was one of the first sort of movements which had a pan-Indian presence, though it was in one taluka. What was fantastic was that the whole country knew about it. Gandhian movement, one taluka, not even one district, lasting a few months. But in Andhra, they would celebrate a Bardoli Day. In Gujarat, they'll celebrate a Bardoli Day. In Kerala, they would celebrate a Bardoli Day. So the idea of a nation evolved through practices of this kind. Joining people's struggles in one little part of India, but giving it a national resonance through all these diverse struggles. So it was not only that people participated in the big national campaigns like non-cooperation, civil disobedience, Quit India, which of course they did. But all these other Kisan Sabha movements, workers' movements, anti-caste movements, Akali movement in Punjab, there were all kinds of these little streams which all flowed into. And the beauty of the freedom struggle was that they did not insist on a hegemonic discourse for that struggle. The freedom struggle was able to, take all these along without suppressing their specificities, autonomies, in fact, promoting it. One of the beauties, I think, of diversity, which we don't talk about in India, linguistic, and people don't maybe know about it enough, but the flowering of the nationalist consciousness, especially at the level of culture, and the flowering of the regional linguistic cultural consciousness go hand in hand. One promotes the other, one encourages the other. So in Bengal, where one of the early, and Bengal and Maharashtra were among the two early areas where the linguistic, regional, cultural consciousness was very strong. It also gives rise to a very powerful nationalist consciousness. And the same stories with Malayalam, as the cultural consciousness goes, it feeds into and derives from.
It's not against each other.
No, in fact, the way I put it is that these are not contradictory, but they are complementary and in fact strengthen each other. So it's very interesting. Tilak, for example, goes to, and it's interesting now because we are still fighting Karnataka and Maharashtra now, politics over Belgaum. Tilak, who was, as you know, a very strong Marathi nationalist, he wrote, his one paper was in Marathi, one in English, the Kesari and the Maratha, two papers he brought out. And he was a great speaker in Marathi. And he goes to Belgaum, to the Kannada-speaking area, and there a local politician starts speaking in Marathi. He stops him, says, speak in Kannada. Assert the right of the Kannada language. You are a Kannada. Why are you speaking in Marathi? So he's not a linguistic chauvinist, but he's a proud patriot of Marathi. I think that complementarity was well recognized and encouraged.
ನಾನು ಮೃದುಲಾ ಜಿಲಿಗೆ ಏನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಈ ವಿಭಿನ್ನತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಈಗ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಚಳುವಳಿಗಳಾಗಿದ್ದಾವೆ, ರೈತ ಚಳುವಳಿಗೆ ಎಸ್ಪೆಷಲಿ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಥ ವಿಭಿನ್ನತೆಯನ್ನು ಉಪಯೋಗ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅದರ ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದೆ. ಅವರು ರೈತ ಆ ಚಳುವಳಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದರು. ಅಂದರೆ ರೈತ ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಲೋಕಲೈಸ್ಡ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಲೋಕಲ್ ಐಡೆಂಟಿಟಿ ಇದೆ, ಒಂದು ಗ್ರಾಮದ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ಐಡೆಂಟಿಟಿ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಆ ಗ್ರಾಮ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಜಾತಿಯವರು ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಅಂತ ಬಂದಾಗ ಆ ಗ್ರಾಮವೇ ಒಂದು ಒಂದು ಫೋರ್ಟ್ ಥರ ಆಗಿಬಿಡ್ತದೆ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಆಗಿಬಿಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಗ್ರಾಮದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಅವರು ಆ ಮಾತುಗಳು ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಇದು ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಜನ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಟೈಪ್ ಇದ್ದರೂ ಕೂಡ ಬಹಳ ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಅವರು ಈ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಚಳುವಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಒಂದು ಈವೆಂಟ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಒಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಸ್ವತಂತ್ರ ಹೋರಾಟದ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಬರ್ದೋಲಿ ಸತ್ಯಾಗ್ರಹ ಆಯಿತು. ಅದು ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ತಾಲೂಕಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೆದಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಸತ್ಯಾಗ್ರಹ. ಬಟ್ ಆ ಸತ್ಯಾಗ್ರಹಕ್ಕೆ ಇವತ್ತು ಕೂಡ ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಆಂಧ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಆಚರಣೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು ಆ ದಿವಸವನ್ನು, ಮತ್ತು ಕೇರಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಚರಣೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು. ಸೊ ಇಂಥ ಚಳುವಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಭಿನ್ನತೆಯ ಒಂದು ಏಕ್ಯತೆ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಅವರು ಬಹಳ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಮಾತು ಒಂದು ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಈಗ ನಾವು ಒಂದು ದೇಶದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ದೇಶ ಪ್ರೇಮ ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್, ಒಂದು ಕಲ್ಚರ್, ಒಂದೇ ಥರ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂತ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಮೃದುಲಾಜಿ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಈ ದೇಶ ಪ್ರೇಮ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿಗೆ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಐಡೆಂಟಿಟಿ ಕೂಡ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿಗೆ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಭಾರತ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಜೋಶ್ ಬಂದಾಗ ಕನ್ನಡಿಗ ಅಂತ ಜೋಶು ಬರ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದು ಈ ಎರಡು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಒಂದೇ. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಥಿಂಗ್. ಈಗ ನಮಗೇನು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾಂಪ್ಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ರಿ, ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರ ನೀ ಭಾರತರ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಎರಡು ಒಂದೇ ಅಂತ ಅವರ ಮಾತು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ತಿಲಕ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ತಿಲಕರಿಗೂ ಮಹಾರಾಷ್ಟ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ ಕೂಡ ಬಾರ್ಡರಲ್ಲಿ ಜಗಳ ಇದೆ ನಮಗೂ ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ತಿಲಕರ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಾಗ ಅವ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಯಾರೋ ಮರಾಠಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಂತ ಬೆಲ್ಗಾಮಲ್ಲಿ. ತಿಲಕರ್ ಅವರು ಅವರನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಿ, ನೀವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಿ, ನೀವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕನ್ನಡ ಐಡೆಂಟಿಟಿ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ನೀವು ಅಸರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಒತ್ತು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೇಳಿರುವುದು ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಕಲ್ಚರ್. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ದಿ ಐಡಿಯಾ ಆಫ್ ದಟ್ ಎವ್ರಿಬಡಿ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ದ ಸೇಮ್, ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಒಂದೇ ಅಂತ ಮಾತು ಅವರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. Thank you, Mridula ji, for that wonderful. That's a very good clarity. I'll just finish off with the last question to Shabnam ji. Shabnam ji, this So, have we done enough to develop this identity of, diversity and this idea of India? Because you talked about diversity in resistance to this so-called this majoritarian and fascist attack. But have we done as Indians or as a civilized society, have we done enough to develop this identity in the last 50 years? If not, what should we do from this point onwards?
Well, when we say we, actually it has become, everyone wants to criticize and say that human rights activist or civil society hasn't done enough. I have a difference of opinion there, because I feel that the civil society has a role to play, very important role to play, and Indian civil society has been extremely active. In fact, in today's India, if there is an opposition to the fascist forces, it is more from the civil society than from the political parties whose task it is to combat the hate and bigotry which is being spread in India. So on one hand, I would say that as individual small organizations, as activists, people have done a lot of work. We have not succeeded. There are no two opinions about it, that we have not succeeded. But the failure is not because there are not enough efforts from the civil society or artists and intellectuals, but because there is no support from the so-called secular political parties. The actual degeneration of the understanding of these values, whether it is secularism or diversity or pluralism, if you look at the cadre, political cadre of the political parties, you will realize that they have, even secular political parties, their cadre is highly communalized. It is sometimes very difficult to find the difference between the cadre of one party or second or third from the right wing, what they speak, their position on terror, for example, their position on 370, their position on LGBTQIA communities and their rights, their position on Ayodhya, and all the major things which have actually contributed towards spreading hatred. The positions are almost as if they were part of the right-wing political parties. So I think that is where this country has failed. In earlier times, there used to be regular political training or training into democracy, secularism, into being just good human beings. All that has stopped. Politics has shifted to psychophancy, which is more seen, as we were discussing earlier, in North India, not so much here. Because, for example, there was an MLC sitting here. If in Delhi there was an MLC sitting here, then there would be 20 young people from the same party who would want to take photographs and immediately put on the Facebook, which there is a difference in South. But that is the kind of politics that it has translated into. Nevertheless, even for the civil society and artists and intellectuals, because the political classes are totally blindfolded to these issues, there is a need for them to do a lot more. Celebrating diversity, not only in terms of performing arts, but daily life practices. There is a need to intervene in the daily life practices. See, I remember as a child, what are they called? The yatris who go everywhere carrying water. I'm forgetting the name. Kavadiyas, sorry. So, Kavadiyas, they were ordinary poor people who walked the length of whatever, 200 kilometers. Now, this was an ordinary cultural practice, a spiritual practice for somebody who believed in that. Now that has been transformed into a high-pitched right-wing agenda. And people on the roads are hoodlums with lathis, with all kinds of weapons, and they can be used any time for creating a riot. And this is how the right wing has intervened in the daily life practices. If you look at what has happened in the tribal belts, beginning from 1970s and slightly before that, initially there would be just Swami who will go from village to village singing a bhajan, who nobody would object to. Then he would form small groups. Then some kind of meetings would start. Then the changing of the animist gods and goddesses by Shabri and Ram and Hanuman started. So it didn't happen in one day, it happened over decades. So this kind of intervention in daily life practices and being on the ground and having first your own understanding of what's happening to this country, that is very important. Important for political parties to sensitize their cadre, especially the large political parties like Congress, and the left is not that large, but even the left cadre to quite a big extent has been communalized.
I'll conclude with Sabaji's final remarks on the way forward.
Oh, okay, I'll do it. So, I'll just very quickly, we all know secularism is under threat and communalism is rising. But since I'm in Bangalore, this is Karnataka, let's look at the currency note. Just bear with me. Look at this is Mahatma Gandhi's picture, Gandhiji's picture. Turn around. You don't have this currency note anywhere in the world. You have multiple scripts written here. So we have, Kannada is one of them. You don't have. You pick up the European euro, you pick up the British pound, you have been to Japan, you pick up China. This is what our country is. It's a multitude of languages. So I think politically the smartest way to fight back, if you wish to, you may want to support them tomorrow, is to raise the issue of federalism. Because right now, in the city where I come, there is a pitched battle with because the justice who was here, Justice Gowda, raised the matter of a constitution bench. There is another constitution bench, which is for the second time, heard the matter of the services between the Delhi government and the centre. And argument has been done by a congressman, Abhishek Manu Singhvi. Because my daughter goes to the courts, she's an intern and all that. So I have been able to watch it. It has been such a pitch argument on denying the state its powers, and because they were losing at the end of it, the person who was Attorney General demanded an even larger constitution bench. Likewise, in the state of Tamil Nadu, you all must be aware what the governor has done. He is not reading out sections of the speech, which is his due process demands that he do. You don't have to look, you're Karnataka right now, there is a BJP government here. Go to Kerala, see how the governor is behaving. Arif Mohammed Khan, not taking on, and these are not elected people, these are selected representatives. So Delhi, very serious battle going on there. That will be a precedent. Abhishek Manu Singhvi is arguing for the Delhi government side. You have brilliant arguments. He's a very, very good lawyer, constitutional matters. I happened to hear 1 or 2 days online, because you can now access the courts online, because the Chief Justice of India, Justice Chandrachud, has earlier ruled on this matter in a constitution bench. But then they got another Chief Justice, a 3-judge bench, to create another constitution bench. Are you understanding what is happening? The government must not get powers. In Tamil Nadu, and of course the Delhi government faces a different reality because there are multiple authorities. But what you're seeing, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, make no mistake. You're seeing a complete subversion of your power as a regional state, as a state with a distinct language. That is actually the politics on which people should fight on. So it's been such a pleasure to be here. And I wish I spoke Kannada, because I tried to understand. I understood a little bit here and there. And so kind of Meros Bhai and all of you and Murthy and everybody who's picked me up, invited me here. And of course Senthil, who is a Tamilian, it turns out, who speaks very good Kannada. And he's, diversity. So we all have diversity, and thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. let's give a very big hand to the panel. As it is, I don't think we may take any questions. Of course, we would like to. I would, because there's no time. But if they are here, we can, I think, whatever questions we have, we can probably give it to them later. But thanks a lot for everything. The idea of diversity and the way we need to move forward is something which we really need clarity. And I think we had a very strong thought process from your side that establishing our identity is not contrary to the national identity, it is one and the same. I think with that message, we'll conclude.